this week. We prefer to sit down, as I speak for myself, I don't know about the others. I am old and fat. Getting up and standing for 5 minutes is exhausting for me. So yeah, I have bad knees.
Okay.
I ain't one of them spring chickens, you hear? Well, sorry about that.
Okay, so for those of you who can stand, do. For those of you who can't, fine.
Okay, I should be good. Should be recording.
Okay. Let's start.
Hello, I hope everyone's having a good day. We're the Affirmative. I'm Katie. This is Eris, Mike, and Helena. We affirm the resolution that the state of Texas should legalize recreational marijuana for adults aged 21 and up. We support legalization because it makes marijuana safer, it reduces unnecessary wrecks, and it creates economic benefits, as well as reducing the illegal market activity. By legalization, we mean marijuana becomes legal for adults 21 and older, but within a regulated system where production, labeling, and distribution are all monitored, similar to alcohol. This is different from decriminalization, where it remains legal but lightly punished. Under our advocacy, marijuana is legal, regulated, and controlled. Legalization, our first point, legalization, just in general, makes marijuana safer. Right now, under prohibition, marijuana is entirely unregulated in a black market. There's no safety checks, there's no labeling, there's no way for consumers to know what they're actually consuming. Legalization can fix that. In states like Colorado, cannabis must be tested for contaminants such as pesticides, heavy metals, mold, residual solvents, and potency levels must be clearly labeled. This ensures consistency and transparency. Under prohibition and decriminalization, though, none of that exists. There are documented cases of laced marijuana causing serious harm, and that shows the risk of an unregulated market. The impact is clear. Legalization replaces uncertainty with regulation, and it gives consumers access to tested and reliable products. Our second point, legalization reduces unnecessary arrests, and it saves law enforcement resources. In 2023 alone, over 25,000 people were arrested for marijuana possession in Texas, and that made about 32% of all drug possession arrests. That's tens of thousands of people entering the criminal justice system for small infractions, and even partial reform shows how impactful change can be. After Texas legalized hemp in 2019, marijuana prosecutions dropped more than 50%. Full legalization would go further and eliminate most of these cases entirely. This matters because it reduces the strain on our police and courts, and it prevents lifelong criminal records for minor offenses. It also allows our law enforcement to focus on more serious offenses. Legalization also creates major economic benefits. Marijuana is already being bought and sold in Texas. There's nothing we can do about it. With that being said, none of that money is coming back into our state. There's no taxes, there's no benefit to the state whatever. Estimates suggest that Texas could see $2.7 billion in annual cannabis sales. Nationally, the cannabis industry already supports over 444,000 jobs. That's a lot of jobs that a lot of people can take up. The key point is that prohibition and decriminalization, it doesn't eliminate demand, it just pushes it underground and makes it unsafe. Legalization allows Texas to capture that value. Legalization also reduces the black market, and it aligns Texas with national trends. Legal markets reduce illegal sales over time by offering safer and more accessible alternatives. The goal is reduction, not perfection. Prohibition and decriminalization guarantee the black market is the only thing up and going. The debate comes down to control versus chaos. Prohibition and decriminalization leaves everybody in an unsafe, unregulated market. Legalization makes it safer, it reduces arrests, and it generates revenue. And it also weakens illegal activity. For these reasons, we affirm.
All right, so my first question for the cross-examination for you is, do you think that it's more important that the government operates in the interests of the public health of its citizens or in market interests like economic growth?
I would say that legalization actually does appeal to the interests of public health. Marijuana is it's unstudied. People are smoking whatever, they're doing whatever, and we don't in Texas have a way to ensure people know what they're smoking, which directs public health, because people are dying. People are being lazy and they're dying, and that does affect public health.
This is true. However, I think there's another aspect in terms of the consequences of it. Do you think that the benefits outweigh consequences to public health, such as increased motor vehicle accidents and youth exposure?
On the side of the increased use, there's nothing shows that legalization increases use within younger access. I would even go to say that with legalization, it allows us to lock down more on underage people smoking and getting access to these drugs. On the thing of impaired driving, according to the National Highway Traffic Security Administration, it shows that there's mixed results and inconsistent causal relationship between legalization and crash rates. So the issue already exists. Legalization will just bring more light to it, and it allows regulation within it.
So in your own words, you said that a part of the benefits of legalization are the cracking down on the black market. But would you say that youth who are seeking marijuana that are under 21 would go towards the continued black market even under legalization? Sorry, that's what's happening.
Thank you.
I'm ready. Hello, my name is Faith Hall, and today my team and I affirmed that Texas should keep recreational marijuana illegal for those 21 and older while adopting a new policy, a new solution, which is decriminalization. Historically, cannabis prohibition in the United States was influenced in part by racialized narratives and discrimination during the 20th century, according to Tikkanen. These policies disproportionately harmed minority communities and created legal consequences that continue today. For example, Black Americans have historically been far more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white Americans, despite similar usage rates. Because of this history, we need a policy that reduces the harm without creating new risks. And decriminalization offers that balance. Now, recreational use refers to personal, non-medical use of marijuana. Decriminalization means possession is treated more as a civil offense rather than a criminal offense, often resulting in fines instead of jail time. Now, contention one is addiction and youth brain development. Legalizing marijuana may increase addiction risk and negatively affect developing brains under the age of 25. Now, marijuana is a psychoactive drug, meaning substances that affect mental processes such as perception, cognition, mood, and emotions. Now, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, about 30% of marijuana users develop some degree of marijuana disorder, with higher risks among those who begin young, such as ages 21 and up. In addition, brain development, particularly the prefrontal cortex, continues into the mid-20s, making younger users more vulnerable to cognitive harms. Even if marijuana is legalized for 21 and older, it doesn't stay confined to that group. Greater access increases youth exposure, and with developing brains, such as ourselves, that leads to the higher risk of addiction and severe mental health issues. This is why decriminalization and not fully legalization is the safer approach. Now, contention two is about driving safety. Legalization may increase impaired driving risks as higher potency products become more widely available. Research published in Frontiers in Psychiatry reports that legalized markets have been associated with the rise of high-potency cannabis concentrates, some reaching extremely elevated THC levels. High potency can intensify impairment, affecting reaction time, coordination, and judgment skills necessarily for safe driving. An article from the Chicago Criminal Justice American Bar Association states, studies have shown that marijuana can impair critical abilities necessary for safe driving, including slowed reaction time, impaired road tracking, decreased divided attention, impaired cognitive performance and sensory perception functions, and impaired executive functions. From 2007 to 2015, while the presence of any alcohol declined from 12.4% to 8.3%, the presence of marijuana rose from 8.6% to 12.6%. Marijuana is already commonly detected among drivers involved in fatal crashes. As accessibility to marijuana rises, the risk associated with impaired driving may rise as well. We cannot deny this. Decriminalization avoids expanding across while still reducing criminal penalties. Contention 3 is decriminalization as a proven alternative. Decriminalization reduces the harms of criminal enforcement while maintaining stable public health outcomes. According to reporting from WSLS 10 News in 2021, and y'all can look this up, marijuana possession arrests in Virginia dropped by approximately 48% after decriminalization was implemented in 2020. This demonstrates that removing criminal penalties can significantly reduce arrests without requiring the full legalization of marijuana. That matters because it shows we do not have to choose between harsh criminalization and full legalization. There is a middle path to this. I urge Texas policy makers to choose a more balanced path. Decriminalization addresses the harms of criminal enforcement without introducing the broader consequences of full legalization. Thank you.
Cross-examination by the first affirmative speaker.
My first question for you is, for the driving under the influence, while people are smoking weed. We have these reports of people driving, but there's, even with decriminalization, that doesn't truly put a law in place. If we go the decriminalization route, how are we going to stop and truly enforce not driving while high? Because there's just a slight fine. There's no jail time. It takes away jail time.
So you're saying that it takes away jail time for those driving while being under the influence of marijuana?
I would say to a degree, yes. Whenever we have decriminalization put in thing, like you said, instead of just having it immediately put you in jail, it just gives you a small fine. Right now, it's still driving under the influence, but with decriminalization, the line would be blurred. The line would be blurred because decriminalization just institutes, well, you're high, you're smoking weed. It's illegal, but because it's decriminalized, there's less fines, it becomes a fine instead of concrete jail time. If you're driving high, you need to go to jail. If there are decriminalization laws in place, how are we going to still ensure that if it constitutes, people are going to jail?
Okay, well, the argument, how do I put this? I would say that it's illegal to drive while being intoxicated, whether it was alcohol or marijuana. And it's with decriminalizing it, we can still, how do I put this? We're only talking about the recreational use of marijuana. We're not talking about driving while intoxicated. The topic is, should people use marijuana under recreational use? There are already laws passed. Thank you. My question for you.
Second affirmative speaker.
So, to the negation's first point of addiction and brain development, especially among youth, it has been found by the Journal of Economic Behaviors and Organization in 2023 that the legalization of recreational cannabis does not lead to the increased availability or usage within youth. In fact, in Colorado and Washington, after they had legalized marijuana, it was found that youth usage of marijuana was decreased by about 12%. Furthermore, the same source found that marijuana could act as a substitute for more dangerous and more addictive substances, which also draws back to our first contention about public health and safety, about how under decriminalization there is no answer for how ordinary consumers are able to know what they are consuming, or know that it doesn't have, say, pesticides, heavy metals, industrial solvents, or such. And furthermore, there isn't a strong argument for how a legalization would increase a usage. In fact, it was, I have too many cards here. Yeesh. In fact, it was found through, I believe it was, oh my God. The American Journal of Preventative Medicine, wherein the increased usage of marijuana after legalization is mostly found to be not increases in frequency of users or rates of high frequency usage, but rather among demographics that are less likely to already be using marijuana, especially among older and white adults. To the negation's second point towards driving safety, there isn't very strong evidence that the legalization of marijuana as opposed to decriminalization would meaningfully increase the rates of inhibited driving. In fact, people who are driving inhibited, that is already illegal, whether it is alcohol or marijuana. As y'all said, there is no link between the legalization and increased rates of driving high. And in fact, it is through the creation of a legal market wherein marijuana is more openly discussed, wherein people are able to know more about how to safely use marijuana, including not driving with it. And to their third point about how decriminalization is able to decrease criminal penalties, frankly, it just makes it less harsh. Your source said that there's a 48% drop in arrests in, I believe, Virginia after decriminalization. That is because it is, as y'all said, treated as a civil offense and thusly usually given as a fine, which usually means people who are richer are then able to more or less shrug it off, whereas people who are less affluent are more heavily affected by it. And ergo, that also means that people with lower rates of wealth are disproportionately affected by decriminalization as opposed to legalization, as they are still being clamped down upon by the law. This includes, as y'all said, the racial aspect, both in the institution and in the enforcement of drug enforcement policies, including in marijuana. It disproportionately affects people of color, especially Black Americans. However, decriminalization does not meaningfully address this. It just makes the punishment a little bit less severe. It doesn't.
I would like to ask you a few things. let me ask you this. Do you believe that drugs of any kind can lead to an addiction, yes or no?
In general, yes. However, marijuana, in terms of drugs, has relatively low rates of addiction as well as overdose.
Okay, so you said that low rates. That doesn't mean that it never existed. That doesn't mean that people cannot become addicted to the drug, correct?
People can be addicted to all sorts of substances. I don't see where you're going with this.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is, why does your team argue that we should legalize marijuana if statistics that we have stated show that people are becoming more addicted to it, even though the prefrontal development doesn't develop until 25? Why do you want to legalize that and increase bigger public risk for those 21 through 24?
As I have established through the source of the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, it doesn't increase rates of high frequency use or use in general within people who already use it. It's more so people who don't. There isn't any evidence, to my knowledge, that there are significantly increased rates of addiction. And furthermore, under legalization, people who want to smoke weed, which already exist everywhere, they're going to, whether it's legal or not, they're able to go to a legal, safe and regulated dispensary, instead of dealers who sell other illegal drugs that are more dangerous and addictive.
So first of all, I'm Jason, speaking as the second constructive speaker for the negative team. Your first contention was that product safety is improved through regulation. However, regulation is not necessarily perfect, even in legal states like Colorado. There was a study from Anna Schwab, who's the Associate Lecturer Professor in Cannabis Science at the University of Colorado from 2023, which found in a study of regulated legal dispensary products that THC potency was actually observed to be lower in the product than it was advertised on the label. So the lowest label reported values, it was found to be 23.1% lower on average, and the highest label reported values, the actual values were reported to be 35.6% lower. So even in a regulated market, discrepancies do slip through the cracks. The study attributed this to a lack of standardized testing protocols, limited regulatory oversight, and financial incentives to market high THC potency. Which brings me to my other point about the industry effects and sort of the consequences of legalization, which is that corporate product development leads to an increase in harm for these products. So like tobacco, for example, according to Beatrice Carlini, Research Associate Professor at Addictions, Drug and Alcohol Institute at the University of Washington, contemporary tobacco, this is a quote, contemporary tobacco became highly addictive and deadly as a result of a series of product developments made by the nascent tobacco industry in the 1900s. So things like different curing techniques, added chemicals, things like that, were a result of industrialization, which is something that we would be likely to see in the legal market. Similarly, from that same article, another direct quote, Washington state marijuana businesses' investment into product innovation and marketing is outpacing society's capacity to comprehend the implications of these changes and to enact evidence-based regulations. So basically, when we do have legal markets, yes, it opens the door for regulation, but that regulation doesn't guarantee that the product is actually going to be accurately reported. Your second contention as well was about unnecessary arrests. Decriminalization from our other, from the Virginia one, of course, we had the, 45% reduction in arrests? 48? 48%. However, where was it? Okay, It doesn't have the state on here. I believe it was Philadelphia. Decriminalization was associated with a 75% reduction in the rate of drug-related arrests for youth, which includes not just marijuana, but other drugs. And as well, the main trade with that is that, as you said earlier, decriminalization might not completely erase those racial disparities, but the trade is that it was not associated with any increase in past 30-day use, or past 30-day prevalence of cannabis use. Which brings me to the third one on economic benefits. You claim that the economic benefits of legalization are, of course, like the increased tax revenue and the job growth and things like that. However, a lot of those big numbers can be more misleading in terms of where that money raised actually goes. So like in Massachusetts, for example, taxes are split between a 6.25% sales tax and a 10.75% excise tax, with the larger portion, the excise tax revenues, going towards regulatory entities like the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission and Cannabis Control Commission. So essentially, from that same source, the National Conference of State Legislatures from September of last year, a direct quote is that the most popular allocation of cannabis tax collections is for the costs of overseeing and regulating the cannabis market. So the number that seems so large, the amount of that actually goes to community reinvestment is not as much as it seems. And similarly, with job growth, the effects of job growth from legalization are temporary. The Cannabis Jobs Report from last year showed that mature markets like Illinois, Arizona, and Colorado had job losses due to an oversupply, high taxes, and reduced customer participation. So essentially, when it's so easy for small businesses to enter this market, they all enter at the same time, lots of job growth happens, but then guess what? Those businesses end up having an abundance of competition, and those jobs fall away as they do not have the ability to compete in such an oversaturated market. And that is my time.
Cross-examination from the second affirmative speaker.
Yes. Gotcha. So you said that tobacco was made to be more addictive sometime during, I believe, the 19th century, the 1900s. However, tobacco was always addictive because it has nicotine, which is a more addictive chemically speaking, than marijuana. Do you have any evidence that such a process might happen with marijuana, or is that speculation?
So it's not necessarily that the risk is an increase in addiction, it's more about the addition of like flavor chemicals and things like that. And you already see that in even the like sort of loophole market in Texas, where there are these like pre-rolls that exist that have like flavorings in them. And that's an example more of what I was talking about, what that study was talking about. So on one hand, yes, it is speculative in terms of we haven't seen this happen yet in the market, but it's a slow-going thing that is motivated by profit incentives, such as with the increase in potency for marketing purposes and for-profit purposes. So
that's within the gray market during status quo, which is prohibition. However, how does decriminalization answer to say dealers having no regulatory oversight as to what is in what they are selling?
I suppose decriminalization doesn't provide that, but under the legal market, it doesn't completely erase that black market either, as I said earlier, especially for youth who would not be able to, under 21 people who would go to those street dealers anyway. Yeah, that's all I have to say though.
Okay. You said on top of law enforcement that there's a 75% arrest reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Third affirmative, I believe. Or
Is that me?
wait, never mind. My bad. You're right. Negative third.
Okay. Hello, I'm Zahara. So The core flaw in my opponent's case is simple. They assume legalization is going to solve problems. However, legalization of recreational cannabis only makes issues worse. The push to legalize cannabis is often framed as a matter of personal freedom and economic opportunity, but that framing overlooks the broader, oh my god, I can't speak today, excuse me. But that framing overlooks the broader societal costs that come with normalization of a psychoactive drug. The first thing my opponent talks about is the tax revenue. Yes, states like Colorado or California have generated billions, but revenue is not the same as net benefit. According to the CDC, legalization is associated with increases in emergency visits, accidental ingestion among children, and cannabis-related health incidents. Those costs do not disappear. They shift onto healthcare systems, families, and taxpayers. So the question is not, does legalization of cannabis make money? It is, does it create more harm than it is worth? And the evidence suggests it does. The next point my opponent talks about is the black market. They're claiming that legalization eliminates it. However, that is simply not true. In California, one of the largest legal cannabis markets in the US, illegal sales still make up a substantial share of total consumption. According to the California Department of Public Health, why is that? Because illegal sellers undercut legal prices, avoid taxes, and regulatory barriers. Legalization does not replace the black market, it competes with it. So now you have two markets, not one. And then the other thing to talk about is the regulation and safety. They do talk about, my opponent talks about legalizing cannabis will allow product regulation. However, it will also drive commercialization, and commercialization drives potency. Research published shows that legal markets have led to the rapid expansion of high-potency THC products, some exceeding 60 to 90% THC, far beyond what existed in the past, and according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, higher THC potency is associated with increased risks of addiction, anxiety, and psychosis. Legalization opens the door for powerful industries to market and promote marijuana aggressively and can lead to increased consumption, particularly among vulnerable populations, and prioritize profit over public well-being. When marijuana is legalized, even with age restrictions, it does not become permitted. It becomes normalized, marketed, and incentivized. Companies begin to profit from higher consumption, stronger products, and repeat users. We've seen this with tobacco and alcohol. Introduce industries that thrive not only on casual users, but on heavy, dependent users. Do we really want to replicate that model with a psychoactive substance? And then they also do talk about impaired driving, which it falls under public safety and public health. But before that, I do want to talk about decriminalization. This is the middle ground, one that protects individuals from unjust criminal consequences while still safeguarding public health and social stability. Me and my team firmly stand against the full legalization of recreational cannabis, and we support its decriminalization. And this position is not contradictory, it is responsible. It removes harsh criminal penalties without opening the door to corporate exploitation. It allows society to treat the drug as a public health issue rather than a business opportunity. It maintains clear boundaries. We do not jail people for minor possessions, but we do not endorse or promote use. Now, at this point, if you are still unsure about one or two of these impacts, you should notice a pattern. Legalization consistently introduces new risks to public health, public safety, and for long-term outcomes. My opponent wants you to believe that legalization is necessary to fix the harms of criminalization. It isn't, and that is what decriminalization does. And it does so without creating additional risks, and most importantly, it directly addresses the disparities that have historically affected minority communities. We can reduce arrests without increasing addiction. We can address inequality without expanding access. We can choose a policy that is fair and responsible. And that policy, just like Faith said, is decriminalization. And that is all. Thank you.
Third affirmative speaker.
So my first question is, with simply.
There's no cross-examination.
Yeah,
This is your
you
speech.
just think-
This
Oh,
is the
it's just
rebuttals.
rebuttal.
Okay, gotcha. I am so sorry. I misunderstood. So the opposition so far has told us that legalization of marijuana will do more harms than good. Do you know what else created more harms than good? Prohibition. In 1920, the Keep the Nation Dry Act was passed, which created a prohibition unilaterally across the nation for alcohol. And in the span of not even 5 years, in Chicago alone, they had an explosion of organized crime. Before Prohibition, in the United States, there was not even a concept of organized crime. This is according to the FBI from around that time and into the modern statistics. That allowed the creation of gangs, Al Capone, massive violence across the country. We saw, the Valentine's Day Massacre, and with the end of Prohibition, we saw a decrease in crime because it was no longer profitable for organized crime, because now that there was regulation, they couldn't sell moonshine, they couldn't sell bootleg. It was suddenly possible for the average consumer to sue the person that they were consuming from. If you're just going to the Joe Schmo on the street, you don't really know his name, he'll probably give you a fake one, and then he'll give you, your weed, and then you go and you smoke something that's laced, and you end up in the hospital, you end up in jail, and you can't sue that other person because they're gone. You never see them again after that. The plug, as the kids call it, disappeared in the air, right? With legalization, it makes it so that it's, as opposed to what the opposition is saying with decriminalization, it actually becomes safer for the consumer because there's economic incentives for dealers to go legal, because it's a lot easier to do business if you don't have potentially several hundred lawsuits pending against yourself, right? And as for organized crime, which I talked about just now with the original prohibition in the United States, we see a $47 billion industry here in the United States with marijuana, and a large portion of that is controlled by organized crime. With the contention made by the opposition, they say that there will be a swarm of small businesses that will suddenly start selling weed, right? However, a problem that does exist right now is that organized crime will often typically bully those smaller businesses that are trying to get startups in decriminalized states. And as a result, that also kills that rival, faction right there against them. Decriminalization does nothing to protect consumers because of that. Finally, my last rebuttal is that due to a massive lobby here in the United States, corn syrup and sugars have been a much greater public safety threat than marijuana, as it's in everything, right? Whereas in recreational use for marijuana, you only have people who are already participating buying this product, and they're buying it more safely. Whereas with sugars, it's in everything. It's making you fat. It's making you horrible, right? As a fat man myself, that's just how it rolls. But legalization would make it overall safer for legal producers because it cracks down on crime. It makes it safer for the individual because now suddenly dealers are having to actually pay attention to what they're selling instead of just being like, oh, well, I just got like devil's head cabbage off, the side of the Walmart and I'm going to give it to him. Oh, it had lead in it? Sorry, I'm gone, right? And then finally, that's all I got.
We've reached the end of the debate, and after hearing both sides bring up their perspectives, the choice becomes clear. Throughout the rounds, my team and I have shown that legalization increases harm compared to better and balanced policy alternative, decriminalization. First, we proved that marijuana isn't harmless. It is a psychoactive drug that affects the mental process that we as humans go through. It messes with our emotions, perception, moods, and even our cognition. Our evidence also showed that about 30% of marijuana users develop some level of marijuana use disorder, which may I add on, there being a higher risk for those who start young, with the brain still developing into their mid-20s. The affirmative side is attempting to paint a picture that legalization leads to being a controlled system around marijuana, but all it does is increase how accessible marijuana will be, which leads to this drug being normalized. Once this becomes normalized in our society, the exposure around smoking won't just be helped at a certain age group of 21 and older, but it will spread to unintended age groups as well. And if that normalization spreads to younger people, it could put their mental health at risk. Once something becomes normalized, the exposure it gets will expand, intentionally or unintentionally. It also affects those who don't even participate in using marijuana. We explained that marijuana impairs the ability to drive. THC affects the body's reaction time, coordination, and judgment, which are all skills needed to operate a motorized vehicle safely. As we previously stated, legalization will lead to higher access to these high-potency THC products, so the two growing together is a disaster. Even if crashes involving marijuana already happen today, legalization will just increase and add on to the problem by making products more accessible to purchase. If high-potency THC products become more available over time, impaired driving risk could go up as well. The other side argues that under legalization, the black market would fall, but as we see in California, all it does is compete with the black market, as their sales price undermine corporate prices to keep in competition. But most importantly, we are offering a solution that answers the concerns of both sides of this debate. Decriminalization reduces the harsh consequences of criminal enforcement while also avoiding the increase of risks that come with legalization. As we stated, in Virginia, marijuana arrest rates lowered by 48% post-policy change, which shows that decriminalization does work as a way to reduce arrest rates without going for full legalization. Not only that, but decriminalization is also associated with a 75% reduction rate of drug-related arrests for youth, with the same effects being similar with adult drug-related arrests. While this massive reduction, there was no increase in the use of marijuana. The affirmative wants to push legalization as the only option with our side, but continuously they fail to prove that the expansion of access that comes with legalization reduces harm. In reality, their proposed policy increases addiction risk, increases driving safety concerns, and allows spread and normalization of THC products into our day-to-day society. Our proposition addresses the negatives and criminalization while still prioritizing the public's health and safety. So Judge, my team and I strongly ask you to consider decriminalizing marijuana in the state of Texas for those 21 and older, because when we ask which policy brings the least amount of harm to all, the current faults with criminalizations beg for change, but not one that will expand the problem like legalization, but one that can balance things out. One that can reduce damages without making things worse, which is why the correct answer is decriminalization. Thank you.
Whether marijuana is perfect. It's whether legalizing recreational use in Texas for adults over 21 and over is better than the system we currently have in place. And the evidence shows that legalization clearly outweighs prohibition and decriminalization across every major issue. First on regulation under legalization. Under prohibition, marijuana is unregulated, meaning consumers have no knowledge about quality, potency, and contamination. Legalization shifts this unregulated substance to a controlled product. This gives transparency to consumers, reduces overdoses and unsafe consumption. Regulation is highly important because it directly affects millions of people's physical well-being. A regulated system reduces overall harm, while prohibition and decriminalization guarantees the continuation of unsafe products and gives consumers no other choice but to continue the illegal and dangerous route. We are not arguing that marijuana has absolutely no health consequences, but that it gives us the opportunity to regulate them. Secondly, adding on to the law enforcement burden, legalization significantly reduces the burden of low-level arrests altogether and allows law enforcement to focus on serious and violent crimes instead of low-level possessions. Currently, Texas is forced to spend time and money on on minor offenses that include stops and searches, arrest proceedings, court proceedings, and jail space. Every dollar an hour wasted on minor marijuana offenses is taken away from real public safety. This fixes an existing issue that is currently happening. Next, on how legalization could lead to taxable income. Under prohibition, demand still exists, but transactions will occur in the illegal market, which produces zero tax revenue. Legalization could lead to a large amount of untouched revenue. States like Colorado and Washington use this money for education, infrastructure, public health programs. In the end, this is a long-term benefit for communities. Prohibition and even decriminalization leads to and sustains the black markets. Legalization, on the other hand, directly competes with them. Legal markets offer safe, accessible alternatives, unlike dealers. Legalization cannot promise that black markets will completely stop, but legalization shrinks the scale and influence. This positively affects a large number of people by decreasing unsafe product distribution. When we look at the impacts, the affirmative has clearly proved to positively affect people at a large magnitude. We're talking about millions of Texans affected by safer products, fewer arrests, and economic opportunities. Decriminalization keeps the occurring problems, while legalization actually solves them. Decriminalization simply reduces penalties. It does not create a regulated system. This means under decriminalization, marijuana is sold through illegal markets, untested and unregulated, with no safety standards and no government oversight. Decriminalization does nothing to replace the illegal market, it only allows it to continue supplying. The negative may have concerns about risks and other factors, but those risks already exist now, and under legalization, we will be given the opportunity to thoroughly and directly address those risks, unlike under prohibition, where those risks are blatantly avoided. With legalization in place, it gives us the opportunity to manage these problems. Prohibition has failed to eliminate marijuana, so it begs the question, will we continue under an unregulated illegal market or a controlled legal system? Thank you.
Sorry.
Real good job, guys.
I thought someone's
That was
computer was
good.
going like
Yeah.
a little bit there for a
Well
second.
done. I thought you all did very good. If I were deciding based on evidence and citations, it would go to you guys, because y'all cited more things, like actual citations, not just this is the statistics. So citations, well done. I think that the arguments that you guys made were very logical, and if I were like the politician doing it, I would see more benefit and value into the point there. So I guess functionally, court of law wise, right, evidence wise, you guys, but like idealistically, wise, you guys. But I think all of you guys did really, really well.
That's a diplomatic
Y'all are
answer.